Hello everyone and welcome to part 2 of my Unity of Command 2 Desert Fox DLC All Missions Hard Guide. In this one, I'm going to cover all of the missions of Conference 4, the biggest conference in the DLC, and having completed, or at least seen all of the Desert Fox's missions, I think I'm in the right position to tell you what you should expect from each of the branches in this DLC. Contrary to what the game suggests, the proper historic branch of the DLC is absolutely the hardest, and this is where you should go to get the biggest proper fighting challenge. Mostly because of the defensive and semi-defensive missions like Retreat from Tobruk, Gazala, and Disaster at El Alamein. The slightly optimistic and quasi-historical second branch is the easiest one. It does share a lot of the early missions with the historic branch, but the prestige you can get at the Herkules missions and the simpler Alamein Halfa mission, well, they play their role, and the later missions of the second branch, which I'll talk about next time, are certainly easier than in the other branches. Finally, the alternative track takes you a little bit sideways. It's certainly more challenging than the second branch, but it will require a somewhat different skill set compared to the rest of the DLC. It will get you into situations in East Africa where you're stretched very thin and you have to juggle all of the supplies you've got, moving units that are on the verge of running out of supplies, and sometimes engaging in difficult fighting like in the mountains, which you don't see in the other missions. The Sudan and Gondar missions that we will look at today are certainly examples of both the supply trickery and difficult combat in the mountains. All in all, whichever branch you take, and I bet most of you will eventually take all of them, Conference 4 is unlikely to bring too much trouble, but I have posted a full playthrough of the Alamein Halfa mission on my second channel, Couchbusik. I believe it is the hardest mission of the bunch, and pretty critical. It shows up in two of the branches. So if you need a more detailed look and a few inane comments I added, check out the description or the end screen to this video. And now, without further ado, let's get to the doodling. Unternehmen Aida is like that Cairo mission we looked at last time, but smaller and easier. As you can see, the British have no troops west of Premature, so all of these objectives, including Bir Hakuma, will fall into your hands without any fighting. The only thing you need to keep in mind here is moving your supply hub to somewhere near Bir Hakuma as your troops are approaching it, because you want them in top shape to deal with the actually relatively difficult objectives, which are Fuka and Cut Coastal Road. Let me just immediately tell you that the guys in the south, including these mobile troops, will be pretty defensive and will not do any counterattacks, try to outflank you or whatever, but one tank unit always ends up at Fuka, and as you can see from the ridges, it's very inconvenient to assault the town from the front, so it's a good idea to actually approach Fuka a couple of turns before the deadline, with the idea that you have the time to surround it and attack it from behind. But in order to break through to it, you need to destroy some of those infantry defenders around Premature. Use recon and force to overcome their zones of control and then pepper them with feint attacks. Or obviously, if you can, with suppressive fire. These guys are out in the open, no cities to ruin. It is very possible to take Cut Coastal Road by the end of turn 3, which gives you enough time for Fuka. So shuffle in, shuffle out, and get those feint attacks and fire suppression going. And once Fuka is yours, aim your sights at Premature, it should fall pretty easily, and then mop up all of the defenders because Cut Coastal Road cuts the supply to all of the British troops here. Final point, based on experience, don't forget to keep some defenders in Bir Hakuma and Cut Coastal Road at all times. The AI is defensive, but it will not wait to retake the objectives if it sees an opening. First Alamein is probably one of the harder missions we're looking at today, what with a difficult supply situation, and this time much more aggressive enemy, much more prone to counterattacks. But at the same time, it offers different solutions, and since it shows up in two different branches of the DLC, I have completed in two different ways, and here we'll discuss the one little trick that solves everything kind of solution. So the cunning trick is to block the enemy supply coming from Alamein by the end of turn 2. At the beginning, as you can see, there are two enemy tank units blocking your advance there, and the way you deal with them is bait them on the Eldaba railway. Leave the opening north of Terralesa, and an Italian infantry unit that is far enough to be beyond enemy vision, and that is strong enough to withstand one tank attack. What will happen is that one tank pushes along the railway, gets stuck at the infantry guy, attacks the infantry guy, the infantry is strong enough to be still alive, and the AI sends the second tank to finish it off. The result of this exchange is that you have the way to Alamein open, and now that the enemy tanks are in a much more vulnerable and exposed position. So on turn 2, go for both the advantages, kill the tanks with your best units, and get to Alamein and block the enemy supply in the incisive of the map. This has an additional huge advantage of blocking enemy reinforcements, which, as you know, are pretty numerous in this one. From there on, the enemy will obviously try to break the encirclement, so it's a better idea to send the more resilient German troops to create the encirclement, and once you reach turn 4, it's gonna turn into a mop-up operation, and it's not gonna be too difficult. This will involve you losing a couple of units, but this is the lesser evil than fighting a straight battle and trying to deal with all of the enemy reinforcements, which is possible, but much deadlier for your troops. My final point is to keep an eye on the Materia Ridge objective. Avoid leaving very weak units there. The enemy likes counterattacking specifically in that objective rather than a Terralesa. And since you need to hold the objective starting from the first turn, it's a very easy way to lose the mission. Alamein Halfa is one of the pivotal scenarios in the campaign, and indeed it feels so. Like in Gazala, you probably will have to tolerate significant losses here, but unlike Gazala, Alamein Halfa is very much a one-trick mission. That trick being taking the hex between Alamein Hazim and Alamein by the end of turn 2. It cuts the supply of most of the map and will essentially decide the mission for you. In order to get there, you need to destroy 2 of the British tank units on turn 1. Obviously, you need to destroy the guy sitting in El Hemeimat, but I don't shy away from wasting a flying artillery on the tank near Alamein Halfa just to make sure it's dead. And the ultimate result for you at the end of turn 1 should be most of your mobile troops sitting around Alamein Halfa and a strong tank unit with oversupply attaching that 3rd British tank in the east. If you get there, your tank will comfortably have the moves to enter the hex, and maybe even attack one of the infantry units sitting around it. Your next step that turn will be to create as many distractions for the AI as possible. Send your weakest throwaway Italian units in all sorts of wild locations. Expose them as much as you can just to give the AI every incentive not to attack the blocking tank. Also, don't shy away from launching a few set-piece attacks around Terralesa, because once again, all of that defending infantry is gonna start running out of supply and will not replenish their suppression. Finally, if you've arrived at this mission via the alternative branch, you will have additional theater assets such as a saturation strike, naval bombardment. Use all of that stuff here on the enemy infantry. for the same reason. Suppress and weaken them as much as you can, because you really need to survive the enemy onslaught in turn 2. And on turn 3, you really need to push your infantry towards Ruwaysat Bridge, supported by any mobile units you have available in the east, to obviously take the objectives, to take the enemy supply hub next to it, and to create the connection between the west and the east of the map to simplify supply in that area. If you manage all of this, from here on, the mission is gonna get easier and easier, because the enemy will inevitably get weaker and weaker. I've had playthroughs where my mobile troops in the south of the map were too out of supply to take Alam al-Halfa and Alam al-Hadim on time, so keep an eye on these units, and if necessary, return them to the western part of the map where there is supply. And obviously, this is one of the missions where having a leveled up emergency supply ability in your Africa Core HQ and your 20th Core HQ is vital. And it goes without saying that once the Alams are yours, El Haman and Road to Alexandria are gonna be easy pickings. So, it's another landing, and this time it's in Malta. Hercules offers an interesting puzzle, and I'm happy to see that it was pretty interestingly tactical and not as frustrating as some naval landing missions are. And like in every naval landing, the airborne troops decide everything. So it's fairly obvious from the airfield objective deadlines that you need to send 4 of your airborne units to take these airfields, and they will. The trick is in where to send the other 2. The other 2 being those elite German units. Because their task will be a little bit harder, and one of them is southeast of Kormi. Blocking that hex will cut the supply to virtually everything in the eastern part of the island, and the AI pretty much doesn't have the forces to deal with that strong paratrooper unit. The last paratrooper goes into a hex east of Rabat. Once landed, use it to immediately attack the British tank unit. This tank has every ability to kick your paratroopers out of Takali airfield, so weakening it on turn 1 and then eventually destroying it is one of the critical objectives in this part of the map. As for the rest, do the naval invasion. Feel free to use all of your theater assets as you please, as you need for the immediate objectives of the naval invasion. Especially Masashlock, try to get as many of your naval landers on the ground on turn 1, but leaving some of them for turn 2 is not a big deal. Masashlock is important because it's a source of supply for the enemy, and a potential port for you. The only caveat is leaving 1 naval strike for Valletta proper. It is easily the toughest objective on the map, and you need a little bit of really effective support there. But once you're firmly on the ground, clear out the eastern part of the island. The defenders are pretty weak to begin with, and they will immediately start running out of supply. Your own supply will still be kind of wonky. Just don't forget that the airfields provide these spots of supply on the map. But at the same time, try to clear the road between Mashalok and Valletta, and then gradually clear the enemies out of that Bay area until you get Valletta itself. As for the radar stations, once you deal with a tank, just use your airdrop supply theater asset to feed your paratroopers and just go there. The defenders, if there are any, will be very deeply without pizza and not too difficult to kill. So, Hercules is not over, and there's still plenty of forts in Malta for us to destroy. Hercules II is very much a one-trick mission, and you may have guessed already what it is those landers in the north of the map. Although this is Italian infantry, they are veterans and they are very well equipped. Which means that with some air support luck, they can do a lot of damage to the enemy enemy and take entire objectives. One of these divisions goes to Fort Campbell. If your air support run is unsuccessful, just land next to it and take the force on turn 2. The other division goes to St. Paul's Bay, and there you probably won't need any air support as persuasion because the probability of kicking the defenders out is about 70%. Once these two objectives are yours, you can direct these units to push into both of the enemy supply hubs. Camp is always empty in my experience, so it's not going to be a big deal to rush from Campbell to the camp, while the supply hub next to St. Paul's Bay will need some convincing by air support, but these guys are sitting out in the open. It's very unlikely not to work. And once the supply hubs are gone, everything south of St. Paul's is gonna start running out of pizza. As for the southern thrust, equip your Italians of the 16th Corps well. Certainly give them some artillery to deal with Fort Magdalena, while the troops of the German HQ should just rush towards the river and kick the defenders on the other bank out. It's a good idea to give your Italian troops the artillery and anything else or nothing to the German paratroopers. This will allow you to launch fire suppression on places like Fort Moster with your Italian troops and then shuffle in the Germans who have more of a punch in direct engagements. And once Fort Moster is yours, you should just rush to the north to connect with the landers and deal with Meliecha, which as you can see is not going to be well defended. Also, a little note about the naval bombardment card you get in Fort Campbell. It's really not like keeping it for the rest of the campaign is necessary, so if you see Herkules II stalling, just use it. The arrangement of objectives in Sudan clearly suggests that we need to split our forces, with one group going towards Kassala and the other dealing with the Massawa situation. Kassala is the easier one, and for that purpose only allocate 3 or maybe 4 motorized units. To take Daradeb, you don't need to clear Sinkat, so just bypass it on turn 1 and rush towards the objective. The AI will try to maneuver its infantry units around Kassala, and with 3 or 4 motorized units, all of that force will be very easy to outflank and leave without any supplies. Just once you get close, get behind Kassala and wait for the defenders to sufficiently stew without supplies. This is the easy part of the map, and my only difficulty here was forgetting about Bissia, so please don't forget about it. It's going to be undefended. The east is going to be a slightly different story, and here your infantry is your most valuable asset. So try not to waste it on the way to Massawa, because your infantry is virtually the only way to reach Asmara and take it, because of the mountainous terrain. You get 2 uses of naval bombardment in this one, and I use one in Massawa, which is an obvious place for that, and the other goes to that infantry unit right at the start of the mission. It may seem a bit wasteful, and it probably is, but it will allow your tanks the momentum to push towards the Enter Eritrea objective and reach Massawa early. Obviously, your HQ should go there as well, and the supply situation there is going to be the main issue. So don't forget about the ship supply sources on the way to Massawa. This is the prime location for setting up your HQ, and you obviously should use most of your trucks in the eastern part of the map. Once again, the west is going to be fine, it has a railway, you won't run out. So once you reach Massawa, it's not going to be too difficult. Try to block the hexes west of it, because this will cut off the supply to Asmara, and then run your naval bombardment and 1 or 2 set-piece attacks to kick the defenders out of Massawa and take it, and then send all of your infantry towards Asmara. It's going to be largely the same story. Attacks, set-piece attacks, trying to kick the defenders out. The trick here is getting rid of Massawa a couple of turns before Asmara, so that you have enough time to position your infantry around Asmara. Gondar kind of breaks with the usual naming convention for missions, where you refer to the mission by its hardest objective. Well, not in Gondar, because Gondar is super easy and you don't have to care about it. Literally, I've never seen the AI neither taking Gondar nor even trying to take that hex. This immediately informs what you should do with the Gedarev and Galabat objectives. Don't assign more than one motorized and maybe one tank unit to take them. Galabat is almost certain to be defended, but you can block its supply and take the defenders hungry, and Gedarev is inevitably going to be empty. For the rest of the Italian troops around Kassala, the goal is to quickly take Gordat and Beren II, also empty, and then proceed to debark, which is a very apt name because of how many trees there are. It will be defended. The weakness for the defenders, it's a difficult hex to supply for the AI, and you will almost certainly see defenders out of supply all the time. And the AI generally is sluggish resupplying that hex, so taking it is not going to be too much of an issue, but as a milestone objective here, I recommend you to clear the road leading from Kassala so that you can set up a decent supply hub for yourself. Just like in Sudan, the east is the harder part of the map, and your infantry once again is going to play the key role. So much so that the motorized divisions are largely relegated to just covering flanks and guarding your supply hub. My approach to Asmara is essentially direct. Use feint attacks and set piece attacks to shuffle your infantry in and out and push at least one of the hexes. The one further away from Asmara is a bit easier because it's more exposed, and then flood your infantry through it and eventually take Asmara. It's not going to be too difficult. And then go to Adwa as quickly as possible. This is where your motorized divisions might help, mopping up any remnants of Asmaran defenders in the plains. But in order to take Adwa, which as you may have guessed is the hardest objective on this map, you need to hold at least 2, but much better 3 hexes around the town before the last turn. And you can also use one of your infantry divisions to breach the mountains east of Adwa and block the road feeding its supply hub. This little move, and possibly the out of supply situation for the defenders, will allow you to do 2 turns of attacks on Adwa instead of just 1, significantly increasing your chances of actually achieving success here. And this is it for today. I've enjoyed this breezy journey through Conference 4 of Desert Fox, and I know for a fact already that Conferences 5 and 6 bring a lot more challenge. Until then, cheers.